There are times, after so many years of following The Young and the Restless, when I feel less like a viewer and more like an old acquaintance of these characters, someone who has watched them grow, fail, recover, and sometimes fail again in ways that feel uncomfortably familiar. The current situation surrounding Phyllis Summers, Victor Newman, Christine Blair, and Michael Baldwin is one of those storylines that does not rely on spectacle, but rather on pressure, steady, tightening, almost suffocating pressure. And if you have lived long enough, you recognize that kind of pressure. It is the kind that does not explode immediately, but instead forces people to reveal who they truly are. I must admit, watching Phyllis being cornered in this way stirred something complex in me. This is not a character I have always sympathized with. Over the years, she has made choices bold, reckless, sometimes outright destructive that have left lasting scars on those around her. And yet, there is a certain inevitability in seeing her now on the defensive, facing consequences that perhaps have been a long time coming. The question I found myself asking was not simply whether she is guilty of something serious enough to warrant Christine's threat of prosecution, but rather this: does Phyllis finally understand the weight of her own actions? Christine Blair's role in this is particularly fascinating. She has always represented a kind of moral counterbalance in Genoa City, though not without her own biases in history. When she warns Phyllis that she is prepared to prosecute if sufficient evidence emerges, it does not feel like empty rhetoric. It feels grounded, procedural, almost inevitable. And for viewers who appreciate structure and consequence, there is something reassuring in that. The law, in this case, is not being bent, at least not yet. But how long can that remain true in a town where power so often reshapes justice? Because, of course, where there is pressure, Victor Newman is never far behind. If Christine represents the formal weight of the law, Victor embodies something far more ambiguous: power without accountability, influence that operates just beyond the reach of official consequence. His demand that Phyllis relinquish control connected to Newman interests in exchange for avoiding prison is, in many ways, classic Victor, efficient, ruthless, and framed as a solution. But is it truly a solution, or simply a transfer of control disguised as mercy? That is where my own perspective begins to diverge slightly from what the narrative might be encouraging us to accept. Victor's offer is not about justice, it is about consolidation. He has identified a vulnerability in Phyllis and is exploiting it with surgical precision. And while that may be consistent with his character, it raises a deeper question that I think is worth considering. At what point does strategic brilliance become moral emptiness? Some might argue that Phyllis deserves this, that she has, in the past, manipulated others and is now experiencing the same tactics used against her. There is truth in that, but there is also a difference between consequence and orchestration. Christine seeks to act based on evidence, Victor seeks to shape the outcome regardless of it. That distinction matters to me, perhaps more now than it did when I was younger. With age, one begins to value not just results, but the integrity of the path that leads to them. And then there is Michael Baldwin, who, in my view, stands at the emotional and ethical center of this entire situation. I have always found Michael to be one of the more quietly complex characters in the show. He is not driven by ego in the same way Victor is, nor by impulse in the way Phyllis often is. He is, instead, a man who understands systems, legal, personal, moral, and tries as best he can to navigate them. But what happens when those systems begin to conflict? When Victor pressures him to adjust his strategy, perhaps even to cross lines he would normally respect, Michael is forced into a position that is deeply uncomfortable. It is not simply a professional dilemma, it is a personal one. Loyalty to Victor has long been a defining aspect of his character, but loyalty, when pushed too far, can become complicity. I found myself asking as I watched these scenes unfold, will Michael bend or will he resist? And perhaps more importantly, what will it cost him either way? If he complies, he risks losing a part of himself, the part that believes in fairness, in due process, in the idea that the law should not be manipulated for personal gain. If he resists, he risks losing Victor's trust, which in this world can carry consequences far beyond the professional. This is where the storyline becomes, in my opinion, particularly rich. It is not simply about whether Phyllis will go to prison or whether Victor will gain control. It is about the moral compromises that occur along the way. It is about the quiet decisions made behind closed doors, the justifications we tell ourselves, the lines we redraw when circumstances demand it. Phyllis, for her part, is not entirely powerless in this situation, though she may appear to be. One of her defining traits has always been her resilience, her ability to adapt, to survive, to find leverage even when the odds are against her. So I cannot help but wonder, is she truly cornered, or is she simply waiting for the right moment to shift the balance? There is also the psychological dimension to consider. Being threatened with prison is not just a legal issue, it is an existential one. It forces a person to confront the reality of losing control over their own life. And for someone like Phyllis, who has always thrived on control, that threat is perhaps more terrifying than the punishment itself. Victor understands this. He is not just applying pressure, he is applying the right kind of pressure. And yet, I cannot shake the feeling that Victor may be underestimating her. He has, on occasion, made that mistake before assuming that others will react in predictable ways. But Phyllis has never been entirely predictable. She is emotional, yes, but also perceptive. If she begins to see Victor's offer not as salvation but as entrapment, she may choose a path that disrupts his carefully constructed plan. As I reflect on all of this, I find myself thinking about the broader appeal of The Young and the Restless, particularly for those of us who have been watching for decades. It is not just the drama that keeps us engaged, it is the recognition of patterns. We see echoes of past storylines, familiar dynamics re-emerging in new forms, but we also see evolution. Characters change, even if only slightly. Their choices carry the weight of history. For viewers over 60, I suspect there is a particular resonance in stories like this. We understand that life rarely presents clear choices between right and wrong. More often, it presents us with difficult options, each carrying its own cost. Watching Michael struggle, watching Phyllis weigh her options, watching Victor maneuver with calculated precision, it all feels, in a way, reflective of real life, albeit heightened for dramatic effect. I also think there is something quietly poignant about seeing characters face consequences later in their journeys. It reminds us that time does not erase the past, it accumulates it, and eventually, those accumulated choices demand reckoning. Whether that reckoning comes in the form of legal action, personal loss, or moral conflict, it is rarely easy. So where does this leave us? That is the question I carry with me as the episodes unfold. Will Phyllis surrender to Victor's demands, choosing freedom at the cost of autonomy? Will Christine succeed in building a case strong enough to bring her to trial? Will Michael find a way to navigate this without losing himself in the process? I do not have definitive answers, and perhaps that is as it should be, because what keeps me returning, year after year, to The Young and the Restless is not certainty. It is the unfolding of character, the slow revelation of truth, and the enduring question of how far people are willing to go when everything they value is at stake.